My husband died on a Wednesday. The other woman called me on Friday. She did not know he was dead. That was the first thing I understood from the call. She was calling to reach him, not to reach me. And when I answered his phone and said his name was not available, she asked when he would be back, and I said he wouldn't be. And there was a silence on the line that told me she understood what that meant before I said the word. I said the word anyway. He died 2 days ago. The silence stretched. Then she said, "Oh God." Her voice broke. And I stood in my kitchen, 48 hours after the hospital, still wearing the shirt I had put on before the paramedics came, and I listened to a woman I had never heard of cry for my husband. My name is Patricia, and what I am about to tell you is the most complicated story of my life. About a man I loved, a truth I discovered, and the 2 years I spent deciding what to do with it. Thomas and I had been married for 19 years when he died. He was 52. The cause was a heart attack, sudden, without warning, in the way that heart attacks sometimes take people who seemed healthy, who went to the gym, who had a physical 8 months earlier that came back clear. He was here on a Tuesday and not here on a Wednesday, and I have never fully integrated that fact into my understanding of how time works. We had built a life that I believed in completely, a house in Columbus, Ohio that we had renovated ourselves over 12 years, every room a project, every project a negotiation, every completed space a small monument to having figured out something together. 2 children, a daughter, now 21, named Elise, a son, now 18, named Marcus. A marriage that was not perfect, but was, I believed, real, honest. Grounded in the particular intimacy of 2 people who had raised children together and renovated kitchens together and been sick together and recovered together. The woman who called was named Diana. She lived in Cincinnati, which is 2 hours from Columbus. She had been with Thomas for 4 years. I know this because she told me. Not on that Friday phone call. That call ended quickly, in the specific, stunned inadequacy of a conversation for which there is no script. She told me a week later, when she called again, because she needed to tell someone, and there was no one in her life who knew about Thomas, and there was nowhere else for her to put what she was carrying. I want to be honest about why I took that call. The answer is not admirable entirely. Part of it was shock. I was still in the phase of grief where my normal defenses were not operational, and I was moving through each day by instinct rather than intention. Part of it was the particular quality of Diana's voice on the first call, the genuineness of her grief, which I recognized because I was inside my own grief, and it sounded the same. Part of it was that I needed to know. That last part is the truest part. I needed to know, even though knowing was going to cost me something I could not calculate yet. Diana was 43. She was a nurse at a hospital in Cincinnati. She had met Thomas at a conference. He was in hospital administration. She was a floor nurse. They had been at the same continuing education event, and he had spoken to her afterward at the hotel bar. She had not known he was married. Not at first. He had told her, eventually, about 6 months in, and she had tried to end it and had not been able to end it, and had spent 3.5 years in a relationship with a man who came to Cincinnati every 2 to 3 weeks, and who she knew she did not have completely. But who she said this to me, and I believed her, who she loved. She did not know about Elise or Marcus. He had told her he had a son, singular, who was older. He had not mentioned Elise. He had not mentioned that the son was 18, not 25. He had given her a version of his life that was plausible and partial and carefully maintained. I asked her, "What did he tell you about his marriage?" She said that it had been over for years, that you lived separate lives, that it was complicated legally because of the children. I sat with this. Our marriage had not been over for years. We had, the previous spring, taken a 10-day trip to Portugal that I think about still. The specific quality of the light in Lisbon, the dinners that lasted 3 hours, the ease between us that I had thought of as the particular ease of long marriage. He had been planning that trip for 4 months. He had been in the other relationship for more than 3 years when we took it. I did not tell Diana this. I did not tell her most of what I knew in those first conversations. I was not ready, and the information did not belong to me alone. My children existed in the middle of this, and whatever I decided to do with what I knew would affect them in ways I needed to think about carefully before I acted. Diana and I talked 5 times over the month after Thomas died. I initiated 3 of those calls. I am aware of how strange this is.
I was calling the woman my dead husband had been seeing for 4 years.
I was doing it because she was the only other person who was grieving him in the specific way I was grieving him, with the additional weight of not being sure anymore who exactly we were grieving. She said to me once, "I think about the fact that you're his wife, officially, legally, and I feel like I have no right to any of this." I said, "You have the right to your own feelings. Whatever he was to you was real." She said, "How are you so—" She stopped. "How are you being this kind about it?" I said, "I'm not sure I'm being kind. I think I'm trying to understand." She said, "Understand what?" I said, "Who he was," because I thought I knew. The grieving happened in layers. First, the loss of Thomas, the actual man, the person who had shared my house and my table and my bed for 19 years, who knew how I took my coffee, and who carried the emotional weight of the family in ways I had never articulated my gratitude for. That grief was enormous and specific, and it took up all the available space in the first weeks. Then the second layer, the grief for the version of my marriage I had believed in. Not the marriage itself. I have come to understand that the 19 years were real, that my experience of them was not false, that a relationship can contain a betrayal and still have been genuinely what I thought it was in large parts. But the complete version, the version in which Thomas and I were fully known to each other, in which our intimacy was total, that version was revealed to be incomplete. He had a 4-year piece of his life that I did not have access to. And the loss of the marriage I had believed in was a different grief from the loss of the man, and both had to be processed simultaneously. The third layer came later, and I did not expect it. Grief for Thomas's grief. Because I came to believe, over months of thinking about what I knew of him, that he had not been happy carrying this. He was not, as I reviewed the evidence of our last years, a man who had peacefully constructed a double life. He was a man who had gotten into something he could not figure out how to get out of, and who had carried it in the way I now recognized. The occasional distance, the weeks where he was harder to reach emotionally, the trip to Portugal that I had interpreted as reconnection, and that I now understood was also, possibly, atonement. I am not excusing what he did. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of this in which I think he was right to do what he did. He deceived me for 4 years. He deceived Diana for most of the same period. He held 2 women inside a construct that they had not consented to. That is a harm, and it is not made smaller by the fact that he is dead. But I also knew him for 19 years. And the man I knew was not someone who did things easily that he knew were wrong. He was someone who did something he couldn't figure out how to stop, and lived with the weight of it in ways I did not see clearly enough to name while he was alive. I told my daughter Elise 6 months after Thomas died. This was the hardest conversation of my life. Elise is my older child, 21, a junior in college, with her father's particular quality of going very still when she is processing something difficult. She came home for a weekend, and I sat across from her at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. She asked me not to tell Marcus, at least not yet. Marcus was 18, first year of college, already navigating the loss of his father with the particular difficulty of an 18-year-old who did not have the emotional vocabulary yet to hold it clearly. She said, "He's not ready. I'll know when he's ready." I agreed. The decision belonged to both of us, and I trusted her read on her brother. Elise did not ask much about Diana. She asked about the marriage, whether I thought it had been real, whether I thought her father had been happy, whether she needed to revise her entire understanding of her childhood. I told her the truest things I could tell her, that the family he had built with us was real, that she was loved fully and genuinely, that the failure was his and not something she needed to absorb into herself. She said, "Do you hate him?" I sat with the question. I said, "No, I'm very angry at him. I miss him constantly. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is hatred." She said, "How?" I said, "I don't know yet. I'm still working on it." Diana and I have not spoken in almost a year. The conversations wound down naturally. There was less and less that needed to be said, and the grief had shifted, for both of us, into something we were managing more internally. The last time she called, she said she had started seeing a therapist and that the therapist had asked her what she needed from the conversations with me. She said, "I didn't have an answer." I said, "I don't think we need an answer for them to have been useful." She said, "I think I needed to know that there was someone else who understood that he was real. That what I felt was real." I said, "It was real." She said, "Thank you." I said, "Take care of yourself." I have spent these 2 years doing the work that grief requires. Therapy. My own, weekly, with a woman named Dr. Hara, who has a particular gift for sitting with complexity without rushing toward resolution. The slow re-examination of what I knew of Thomas, the renegotiation of memory that happens when new information is introduced into a completed past. The decisions about the children, what to tell them, when, how. Marcus will learn, eventually. Elise and I have talked about it. He is 19 now and still adjusting. When the time is right, when he is stable enough to hold another complication, we will tell him. Not to burden him, because he deserves the true version of who his father was, and the true version is not reducible to a single thing. Thomas was a man who raised 2 children with love and attention. He was a man who renovated a house room by room for 12 years. He was a man who took his wife to Portugal and walked through Lisbon in the October light. He was also a man who kept a 4-year secret and died before any of it could be resolved. All of these things are the same man. Grief does not require you to choose one version. It asks you to hold the whole complicated person and love them and be furious at them and miss them all at once, indefinitely, without resolution. I am doing that. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I do not have a timeline for when it becomes easier. But I am doing it. Every day, I am doing it. If you have ever had to revise your understanding of someone you loved, If you have ever held a complicated truth about a person you could not ask questions of anymore, you are not alone. Complexity is not a reason to stop loving. It is not a reason to stop grieving. It is not a reason to stop being honest. It is just the condition under which everything real seems to have to happen. There is a night I keep returning to. Not a dramatic night. Not the night he died. Not the night Diana called. A night from years before any of this. We were maybe 8 years into the marriage. The children were young. Elise was 9, Marcus was 6. It was a Tuesday in February, one of those evenings where nothing special happens and everything is ordinary, and you do not know, in the middle of it, that you will remember it. Thomas had put the kids to bed. I was washing dishes. He came downstairs and stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me for a moment without saying anything, which was something he did sometimes. Just stood and watched, in a way that felt like attention, like being seen. Then he said, "I was thinking today about how lucky I am." I said, "Yeah?" He said, "You, the kids, this kitchen." He looked around at the half-renovated space. We had been in the middle of the cabinet project, which took 8 months longer than planned. Even this disaster of a kitchen. I said, "The kitchen is not a disaster. The kitchen is a process." He said, "The kitchen is a process that I am very glad to be in with you." I dried my hands. I looked at him in the doorway. I said, "Me too." We had other conversations like that over the years. Ordinary Tuesday evenings where one of us said something that named what we had, quietly, without ceremony. They are the texture of long marriage, not the dramatic moments which you expect and prepare for, but the ordinary ones, which are the ones that actually add up. That Tuesday in February is among the truest things I have. It happened. He meant it. I believe still that he meant it. The complication that came later does not retroactively make that evening false. The evening is still there, in the past, exactly as it was. This is the strangest thing about what I am carrying. The past is fixed. I cannot reach backward and change the evenings that were real. I cannot make the Portugal trip not have happened. Cannot revise the conversations that were honest. Cannot undo the particular quality of a man who stood in a kitchen doorway on a Tuesday in February and said he knew how lucky he was. What happened alongside those things does not erase them. It complicates them. There is a difference. Dr. Hara asked me once, "What do you need from this to feel like you've processed it?" I said, "I don't know. I'm not sure processing is the goal." She said, "What is the goal?" I thought about that. I said, "To be able to hold all of it, the 19 years and the 4 years and the man who was both. To love what was lovable without pretending the rest wasn't there." She said, "That's a sophisticated goal." I said, "I don't have a simpler one available." She smiled. She has a specific smile for when something is both true and difficult. She used it then. I have not made peace with what Thomas did. I want to be clear about that. Making peace and continuing to live are two different things, and I have found that you can continue to live while the making peace is still in progress. You do not have to wait for the resolution to function. You do not have to have settled the account before you are allowed to have a morning that feels ordinary, or a dinner with Elise that makes you both laugh, or a walk in the neighborhood where the maples are turning and the light is the specific light of October that makes everything look like it matters. My neighbor, a woman my age named Carol, who knows most of what happened because we have been neighbors for 14 years and she has seen me through things before, brought me dinner 3 times in the first month. She did not ask questions. She brought food and sat with me for an hour and left. She did it 3 times. On the 3rd time, I said, "You don't have to keep doing this." She said, "I know." She did it a fourth time. That is also a thing that is true. The people who show up and keep showing up. The world that contains Diana and also contains Carol. The week after Thomas died contained the phone call from a woman I did not know and also the dinner from a neighbor who did not need to understand everything in order to stay. I have been thinking recently about telling Marcus. Not making a decision, just thinking about what it would look like, how I would say it, what I owe him and what I owe Thomas's memory, and what I owe the version of his father that Marcus is still constructing at 19 in the way that children of the dead construct the people they lost, finding them in memory and photograph and story. Elise thinks he is ready. She said so last month. She said, "He's different than he was a year ago. He can hold more." I believe her. I trust her read on her brother because she has always had it. She has always understood Marcus in ways I arrived at more slowly. When the time comes, I will tell him. I will tell him the full version. Genuinely and completely, and who was also genuinely and completely, and who was also capable of a sustained failure of honesty in another part of his life. Both things. The complete person. That is what I owe Thomas in the end, not to reduce him to what he did wrong, and not to pretend he didn't do it. The full, complicated accounting. Every room of the person, including the ones I didn't know were there. The kitchen he and I renovated is finished now. It has been finished for 4 years. We completed it 6 months before he died. The cabinets he agonized over for 8 months are exactly right. The counters are the ones I wanted. The light fixture over the island was his idea, and he was correct about it. Every morning I make coffee in that kitchen. It is the kitchen we built. It is also the kitchen I am standing in alone, which was not the plan. Both of those things are true every morning. I make the coffee anyway. A woman in my grief group. I joined a grief group 8 months after Thomas died, a small one, 6 people, held in the basement of a church on Thursday evenings, said something in one of our meetings that I have thought about many times since. She had lost her mother. Not a husband, not a betrayal. A straightforward loss, which is still enormous and is also different from what I was carrying. She said, "The thing nobody tells you about grief is that it's not linear. You don't move through it. It moves through you. And sometimes it moves backward. And some days you are fine, and some days you are exactly where you were on day 3. And both of those days are legitimate. Both of those days are legitimate. I have had many of each kind. The days where I think about Thomas with something that approaches peace, where I can hold the 19 years and the complication and still see the kitchen and the Tuesday in February and the Portugal light, and feel the loss clearly but not be destroyed by it. And the days where I am exactly where I was in the hospital parking lot, getting into my car after the paramedics had taken him, wondering how a Wednesday could just take everything. The group has been useful in ways I did not expect. Not because anyone else has been through what I specifically have been through. They haven't. But because grief, at its core, is the same experience regardless of what produced it. The loss of a person you loved who is not there anymore. The renegotiation of your daily life around an absence. The slow reconstruction of an identity that was partly built around someone who is gone. We do not talk about what each other's losses specifically involved. We talk about what we are feeling, which is more useful. Grief is not improved by competitive accounting of whose loss was hardest or most complicated. Grief is improved by being witnessed, which the group provides. My therapist asked me recently what I would say to Thomas if I could. Not for him, for me. to understand what is still unresolved. I sat with that for a long time. I said, I would ask him if he had been happy. Not with me, in general. If the life he had, all of it, including the parts I didn't know about, if it had given him what he needed. Because I think that's the question I don't have the answer to. Whether he was living the life he wanted, or whether he was trapped in something he had constructed and couldn't find his way out of. Dr. Hara said, "What would you want the answer to be?" I said, "I don't know. I think I want both. I want him to have been genuinely happy in the parts that were good, and I want him to have been genuinely unhappy with what he chose to keep hidden. I want both to be true." She said, "That's a very human thing to want." It is. It is a very human thing to want the people who hurt you to have suffered enough that the suffering was not invisible, but not to have been miserable in the parts of their life that were also yours. It is not a simple thing, but it is true. Elise called last week. She calls every Sunday now. She has since Thomas died, which is a pattern we fell into without deciding and have maintained without discussing. She said she had been reading about grief and had come across something that she wanted to tell me. She said, "It said that the goal of grief isn't to stop loving the person or to stop missing them. It's to be able to carry them with you without being stopped by the weight." I said, "That sounds right." She said, "Are you there yet? Being able to carry it?" I thought about the coffee in the morning, the kitchen, the October light. I said, "I think I'm getting there." She said, "Me too." We talked for another 40 minutes about other things, her classes, her friends, a trip she is planning for the spring, normal Sunday things, the kind of conversation that is also, underneath, a version of, we are still here, both of us, carrying what we are carrying, and we are okay. Both of us carrying it. Both of us okay. That is what I have 2 years later. My daughter who calls every Sunday. The grief group on Thursday evenings. Dr. Hara on Tuesdays. The kitchen that is right. The October light. And the full, complicated truth of a man who was many things, some of which I knew and some I didn't, all of which were real. I am learning, slowly, to carry all of it. Subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it is worth your time. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from. And if you have ever had to carry a truth about someone you loved that changed everything and nothing at the same time, I want to hear from you. I read every single one.